door against noise. Hey guys, tonight we step quietly into the cool hush of a medieval monastery, where the sun creeps slowly through stained glass and the day begins with a yawn you try to muffle beneath your woolen cowl. Your bones creak like old choir benches, and as you swing your feet to the cold flagstone floor, you're already thinking of the beeswax. Not the candles, though yes, they'll be needed soon, but the little bowl of golden balm waiting beside your desk in the scriptorium. The scriptorium, that cold, echoing room of soft scraping, whispered Latin, and the eternal rhythm of ink and parchment. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. Always fun to see who else is drifting off from the other side of the globe. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge slowly past the dormitory, following the low morning chant already humming in the chapel, and slip through the arched wooden door of the scriptorium. The air smells faintly of dust, old leather, and lavender. Your corner is still as you left it: stone bench, wooden lectern, a small cloth bundle of goose feathers, and the beeswax pot, glistening like morning honey. You sit down, rubbing your palms together, trying to warm them before dipping the quill. The ink is always temperamental at this hour, if you go straight from cold fingers to parchment. You risk a blotch the size of an angel's wing right on your illuminated letter. That's where the beeswax comes in. You scoop a little with your pinky, gently now. It's soft, not melted, and rub it between your fingertips. It doesn't just warm your skin, it creates the faintest tack. Just enough to grip the feather and steady the hand. Old brother Osmond swears it improves his calligraphy. You're not so sure, but you also remember the time he dozed mid-sentence and drooled on a vellum leaf. The scriptorium hasn't let him live it down. Around you, others begin to trickle in. Brother Cedric muttering his prayers. Brother Alban with a smudge of soot on his brow. No one speaks. The silence isn't just habit, it's part of the vow. Only the scratching of quills, the occasional cough, and the creak of wooden stools breaks the stillness. Your project today: copying a psalter. It's not glamorous work, no dazzling gold leaf, no illustrations of beasts devouring sinners, but the psalms are needed in the side chapel. And your hand is steady as you unroll the parchment and gently press the corners with beeswax-tipped weights. You realize this isn't about beauty. It's about rhythm, repetition. You trace the letters in slow, deliberate strokes, occasionally reapplying wax to your fingers to keep the grip smooth. Historians still argue whether monks of the 12th century used wax strictly for utility or if they attributed symbolic value to it: warmth, purity, obedience. You don't think about that. You're more concerned with whether the ink will hold today or if the humidity will force you to scrape and restart. Still, there's something comforting about the ritual: warm wax, cool quill, the click of stylus on board when notes must be taken between lines. Midway through the morning, Brother Fulbert passes behind you, nodding approvingly at your steady hand. He smells faintly of beeswax himself. He's in charge of the candle room today. And his robe always carries that sunlit scent. It reminds you that the scriptorium is only one place where wax works its silent magic. At your feet, a small, wool-padded box contains scraps of unusable parchment, stray feathers, bits of wax. Nothing is wasted. Later today, you'll melt the shavings and add herbs, lavender, maybe a bit of thyme, and use it to polish the covers of older manuscripts. But for now, you return to your psalm. Domini, quid multiplicati sunt qui tribulant me. The ink flows, the quill dances, the wax does its job. Somewhere behind you, someone sneezes. Brother Cedric probably forgot to warm his fingers again. By the time the bell for terce tolls, your hand is sore, but the scroll lies even, legible, and clean. No blotches, no drips. You close the inkwell and gently rub the quill shaft with a dab of wax to keep it from cracking. Another monk leans over to see your work and gives a tiny nod. Approval in this room is rare and whispered. If it ever happens, you stretch your shoulders, quietly, mindful not to disturb the sacred quiet, and gather your materials. As you fold the cloth around your tools, you pause to admire the sheen on the wax pot. It's half empty now, Time to visit Brother Thomas in the apiary tomorrow. You make your way from the scriptorium down a narrow stone passage lined with flickering wall sconces. The smell of soot mingling faintly with rosemary from the herb cloister. Your next task waits inside the monastery's small library annex, a room filled with leather-bound books and wooden chests that creak louder than the abbey doors. Today, you'll spend the next few hours polishing psalter covers. Yes, polishing. Not exactly thrilling, but oddly satisfying, and a noble calling in its own right. The psalters are old, not ancient, but old enough that their leather has begun to dry and crack under the constant press of damp robes and cold air. That's where your beeswax comes in again, not in a candle, not in a seal, but as a balm for sacred skin. You lift the first psalter from its shelf, cradling it like a sleepy cat. The leather binding is firm, but dull. The edges curl slightly where hands have lingered too long during midnight vigils. You set it gently on the table and reach into your pouch for the little tin of wax and oil blend Brother Gervais prepared. His formula includes beeswax, linseed oil, and a whisper of marjoram, just enough to give the blend a warm scent when you rub it in. You dip a soft cloth into the pot and begin working in slow, deliberate circles. The wax spreads like butter across warm bread. Almost immediately, the leather begins to respond, darkening slightly, regaining a gentle sheen like it's just woken up from a long nap. Historians still argue whether monks consciously treated books as sacred physical bodies or simply practical tools. But standing here, you're convinced it's a bit of both. You wouldn't rub wax into a ledger of wheat tallies with this much care. But this is the Psalms. This book will be kissed, prayed over, and possibly dropped by someone half asleep during a vigil. It deserves to shine. You think back to that one psalter that fell into the well during the feast of St. Felix. The silence that followed its splash was somehow louder than any bell. Brother Hugo had to fish it out with a hooked pole, muttering something about divine irony and poor grip strength. The cover peeled away like bark from a soaked tree. You remember helping scrape and recondition it, layer after layer of beeswax buffed in over days until it no longer smelled of moss. Now, you're the one doing the buffing. You finish the first book and set it aside, reaching for the next. This one's smaller, thinner, but its clasp is nearly rusted shut. You use a beeswax-treated rag to clean the metal catch, and it opens with a small pop. Success. Somewhere in the distance, a bell tolls for sext, but you barely notice. Every so often, you find little surprises tucked into the pages. A feather, a pressed violet, a torn edge of someone's old notes. You never keep them. You gently tuck them back into the book and seal the edge with a dab of wax on your finger. It's not official preservation, but it works, and it smells better than vinegar parchment wash. That's for sure. At one point, Brother Elias stops by, eyeing your row of glistening books. You polish like someone who's trying to marry a manuscript. He whispers. You smirk, shake your head, and keep working. Jokes are rare here, and that one will probably circle the cloister 3 times before dinner. There's a story the older monks tell, half in jest, half as warning, about a novice who mixed too much oil into his wax blend and accidentally glued several psalters together in a sticky stack of sanctified mess. Took 3 brothers, a kitchen knife, and a whole bottle of lampblack remover to separate them. An unholy trinity of idiocy. Brother Marcus called it, so you take your time. Each layer is thin, gentle, reverent, like wrapping a sleeping child in a second blanket. You hum quietly as you work. Not quite Gregorian chant, not quite tuneless, just a low, even rhythm that keeps your mind from wandering. The wax isn't just for appearance. It protects the leather from mold in the damp months, and it keeps the smell of mildew at bay. It even repels a bit of insect damage, although the occasional silverfish still finds its way into the stacks like a tiny scroll thief. You finish the last psalter and stack them gently in the wooden chest lined with linen cloth. Each one catches the candlelight like the surface of still water, gleaming softly, patiently, waiting for the next hand to open them. Before you leave, you run your fingers across the covers one last time, not checking your work, just acknowledging them. These books, copied and bound by men like you, held by hands long gone, are still here, and so is the beeswax. That small touch of warmth that bridges generations through cloth and leather and time. You blow out the lantern and head back through the passage. Somewhere above, a dove coos. Somewhere below, someone is coughing into a sleeve. But here, in this small space of wax and prayer, all is quiet. The corridor beyond the library bends in a slow arc. The kind that seems to lead everywhere and nowhere at once. You walk in the hush. Fingers still faintly tacky from the beeswax polish. Rubbing your thumb against your forefinger as if trying to trap the moment before it fades. There's no rush. No one rushes here. You take a right past the candle alcove. Then descend a narrow stair into the undercroft, where the real secrets of monastic life are stored, not relics. Not wine, but silence itself. At the base of the stairs is a heavy wooden door, iron-banded and worn smooth from centuries of quiet hands. It creaks open, just a little, revealing the archive room, a place lined with locked chests, small cupboards, and narrow niches carved into the stone. It smells of dust, pine resin, and the faintest trace of something sweet and old, beeswax. Again, this is where the abbey seals things, not just letters or scrolls, but also silence itself. Each cupboard, each latch, each rolled parchment in here is stamped with a wax seal, sometimes red, sometimes dark amber, sometimes nearly clear as glass. The seals are unassuming, often plain, but they say more than any ink ever could. You step inside. The wax seals wink in the candlelight like sleepy eyes. You pass a shelf labeled, "No light aperior, do not open." That one holds the disciplinary logs from a generation ago. You've never peeked. Tempting as it is, you suspect reading them would get you your own wax seal in the punishment registry. Your task today is to reseal 3 scrolls that have been reviewed by the abbot. You walk to the workbench at the far end of the room and unroll your pouch. Inside, a short-handled brass spoon, a block of sealing wax, and a carved stamp bearing the symbol of the monastery, an open hand beneath a star. You scrape a bit of wax into the spoon and hold it over the candle. The wax softens, liquefies, glows with that telltale golden sheen. You breathe in its scent, honey, dust, maybe a hint of rosemary from the oil it was mixed with. You drip it carefully onto the twine binding the scroll. Then press the stamp in one clean, firm motion. When you lift it, the seal is smooth, clear, and warm to the touch. Historians still argue whether monastic seals were more about security or ceremony. Some say it was bureaucratic habit. Others say it marked divine finality. Either way, once sealed, the scroll becomes untouchable unless properly sanctioned. You repeat the process for the other 2. Each seal different, but all familiar. One carries a slight dent. The stamp's edge has been worn by centuries of use. You smile. Even silence has a patina here. There's one cupboard you've never opened. It has no lock, just a wax seal that is reapplied every year by the abbot himself. Rumor says it holds the names of those who almost, but not quite, left the abbey in their early years. The seal is wide and pale, stamped with a triple-leafed symbol no one else uses. You glance at it now, wondering what would happen if it were opened. Would names drift out like candle smoke? Would memories unstick themselves from the walls? You shake the thought off and return to your bench. On a small piece of parchment, someone has written a note. Re-wax shelf 3 hinges. You reach into the lower drawer and pull out a small block of plain beeswax. No scent. No oil. Just pure golden wax pressed into a rectangle. You rub it gently along the metal hinges of the shelves. The wax leaves a faint sheen. And when you open and close the cabinet, the creak vanishes. Gone. Like a whisper pulled beneath the floorboards. That's what the monks here do. After all, they manage sound. Through silence. Through chant. Through beeswax. One shelf is filled with sealed letters from foreign abbots. Some are decades old. Others are recent, though you know they may never be opened. They're messages sent for the sake of sending, an old Benedictine tradition. Letters to no one. Received by everyone. Brother Leon calls them. You reseal one letter that's grown brittle at the edges, melting a tiny bead of wax over the existing mark. A warm seal, not a broken one. You wonder what it says inside. Maybe a prayer, maybe just weather reports from a quieter valley. One scroll in the far corner catches your eye. The seal is deep red, shaped like a fish. Odd, not a monastery symbol you recognize. You leave it untouched. There are rules here. And even curiosity has a bedtime. You pack up your tools, carefully wrapping the brass spoon in cloth so it doesn't rattle. Before leaving, you press one fingertip to the wax seal you just made. Still warm, still pliable, like the rest of this place, form held in gentle stillness. As you step back into the stairwell, you hear the faint hum of someone chanting above, a slow, low tone, held for breath after breath. The abbey moves forward on quiet notes and warm wax, each moment sealed into the next. You leave the archive with its wax-sealed mysteries behind, emerging once more into the bright chill of the cloister walk. Your next stop lies in the herbarium, a small, sun-warmed courtyard where sprigs of lavender nod gently in terracotta pots and rosemary spills lazily over the edges of raised beds. But you're not here for plants. Not really. You're here for the waxy little concoctions the apothecary monks have been blending all morning. Your hands still smell faintly of beeswax, but now you're going to make something that smells even stronger, healing salve. For skin, for cracked knuckles and dry lips and the occasional mystery rash brought on by too many nights copying psalms in damp socks. Because monks suffer too, and beeswax is their ointment of choice. The apothecary is a cozy stone room tucked behind the fig trees. And it always smells like someone spilled a medieval spice rack. You push open the wooden door and duck beneath the low lintel. Brother Theo is already there, hunched over a copper bowl, stirring something thick and glossy. You're late, he mutters, though you're exactly on time. It's just his way. You wash your hands at the stone basin, cold water, gritty soap, towel woven with an embroidered bee, and join him at the bench. In front of you are neat piles of dried herbs, comfrey, calendula, thyme. Brother Theo is measuring beeswax pastilles into a small ceramic pot resting above a candle flame. The wax melts slowly, like a golden glacier retreating. Historians still debate whether these wax-based remedies were actually effective or just ritual comfort wrapped in practicality. You'd say both. You once had a rash on your shin that nothing cured until Theo smeared on one of his infamous violet salves. It smelled like old socks but worked like a charm. You take the wooden spoon and begin to stir. The melted wax thickens slightly as the oil infuses with herbs. It takes patience, no rushing or the wax will seize. And then you're back to square one with a burned pot and Brother Theo's silent disappointment. When it's just right, shiny, smooth, and smelling faintly of lemon balm, you pour the mixture into small clay pots to cool. You label each with a careful script, unguenta fratrum, ointment of the brothers. Some will go to the infirmary for Brother Lawrence aching joints. Others will be handed to scribes with raw fingertips. A few jars, always unmarked, are tucked quietly into the abbot's chamber. He never asks, but they always disappear. You glance up at a shelf above the workbench where older jars are stacked, some dating back decades. One is labeled in a fading hand, for cold ears. Lent 1189. The wax inside is still intact, though it smells a bit like shoe polish. As you clean the spoon and scrape the last golden threads from the rim of the pot, Theo surprises you by handing you a fresh beeswax bar, soft, amber, and still warm from the mold. For your hands, he says, though what he means is, you're doing fine. You pocket it with a quiet nod, tuck your sleeves up again, and begin mixing a second batch, this one for sore backs. It includes crushed juniper and a hint of goose fat, which somehow makes everything smell faintly like roasted Sunday. While you stir, you notice the beeswax behaves differently depending on what herbs it touches. Calendula makes it brighter, thyme dulls it slightly. The wax isn't just filler, it responds, shifts, like it's remembering something older than you. The monks have long believed beeswax holds warmth in more than a physical sense. It remembers sunlight, they say. It holds onto the hum of summer and releases it slowly, like a whispered song in the depths of winter. You ask Brother Theo once if that's true, if he believes wax can carry memory. He shrugs, says nothing. Then a moment later, he replies, depends who's remembering. Outside, the wind picks up. A few dried leaves skitter across the courtyard tiles. You cap the final jar, wipe down the bench, and wrap the extra beeswax block in linen for the next novice to find. Someone will need it, someone always does. Before you go, you slip a tiny jar into your robe pocket. Not for you, of course. It's for Brother Felix, who always forgets to ask, even though his hands crack every Advent. As you step back out into the sunlight, you feel the warmth of the little jar against your side. A tiny miracle, sealed in golden balm. You walk back through the herb-scented cloister, and a soft wind stirs the hem of your robe. The sun is now leaning gently into afternoon, casting long, honey-colored shadows across the stone. It's the quiet hour, the lull between midday duties and evening prayers. A perfect time to slip into the sacristy, the sacred storeroom that holds everything from altar cloths to incense burners. And somewhere within, tucked behind a wooden coffer, a small pouch of beeswax-infused herbs waits patiently to freshen the very air. The sacristy has its own kind of silence, not the sleepy hush of the scriptorium, nor the whispered focus of the archive. No, this silence is holy, heavy, like someone important just left and might return at any moment. You slip inside and breathe in the layers of scent, linen, ash, something faintly metallic. You're not here to prepare vestments or count communion cups. You're here to refresh the wax sachets that hang discreetly behind the altar cloths and under the wooden eaves of the chapel. These little bundles aren't just about making things smell nice. They're a blend of reverence and quiet chemistry. Monks discovered long ago that wax, especially when mixed with the right herbs and spices, could preserve and slowly release fragrance over weeks, even months. You remove one of the old sachets from behind the altar, its scent faded to little more than a suggestion, and untie the waxed linen that holds it closed. Inside is a mixture of dried rose petals, clove, a sprig of sage, and tiny pearls of beeswax infused with cinnamon oil, still faintly warm to the touch. Even after all this time, you press your thumb into one, and the aroma releases like a long-held sigh. Historians still argue whether this was an official practice or just a regional monastic quirk. Some say it began in Burgundy. Others insist it came from North Africa by way of herbalists. Either way, you've been doing it since your first year in the order, and you'd miss it if it were gone. You take out a fresh sachet, new beeswax beads prepared just this week, and begin layering in herbs. A pinch of lavender, some marjoram, a bit of dried orange peel, which Brother Thomas insists is too worldly, but which the abbot secretly loves. You tie the pouch closed, gently warming it between your palms so the wax beads begin to melt slightly and fuse with the fabric. Then you tuck it into its hidden alcove behind the altar, where no one will see it, but everyone will sense it. It's a funny little ritual, part housekeeping, part spiritual stewardship. The wax holds more than scent. It holds memory, warmth, intention, like a silent monk, keeping vigil behind the scenes. As you work your way down the nave, replacing the old sachets one by one, you start to notice the shift in the room. The air grows softer, the smells mingle, a kind of invisible choir rises from the blend, not with voices, but with the familiarity of home. You stop briefly to admire the altar candles. These are different from the others, larger, taller, whiter, beeswax only, no tallow, no additives. These are the candles made by hand for holy feast days. Molded in silence, trimmed in gold leaf, they glow faintly even when unlit, as if remembering fire. Once, during Epiphany, a novice tried to enhance the altar's aroma with pine resin and accidentally glued a hymnal to the floor. Since then, only you and Brother Renard have been allowed to handle the sachets. An honor, if a mildly flammable one. You move to the sacristy cupboards and open a cedar box containing older sachets. Some yellowed with age, a few still smell faintly of frankincense. One is labeled, Palm Sunday 1152, in faded ink. You lift it to your nose and close your eyes. The scent is faint but unmistakable, earthy, resinous, warm, like sunlight in dust. You don't reuse these, of course. These you return to the herb garden. Bury them beneath the fig tree in quiet thanks. Nothing wasted, nothing forgotten. Before you leave, you check the small crucifix hanging above the altar. Behind it, another sachet, one of the oldest. You adjust it slightly, letting the wax bead fall against the wood. A soft click. No one else would notice. But you do. As you step back into the nave, the chapel smells different now. Not perfumed, not pungent, just balanced, holy, like the air itself had remembered how to breathe. You pause at the threshold and look back once. Briefly, everything is still, and quietly alive. The wax does its work in silence. As do you. You're not late for Vespers. Not yet. And so you turn from the chapel's sweetened hush and step into the side passage that leads to one of the monastery's most curious spaces, the time room. It's not a grand chamber or even especially large, just a former storeroom with thick walls and no windows. Home to a simple device that monks have used for centuries to mark the slow, patient passing of hours. The wax clock. Not a clock as you'd know it, with gears and pendulums and the constant tick of anxiety. This one is silent, melting, gliding downward in soft pools. A tall beeswax column stands at the room's center, scored gently with lines to show the passage of time. As the candle burns, the wax drips steadily, predictably, measuring the day not in seconds but in silence. You step inside, and immediately the smell hits you. Warm beeswax, of course. But also something older, something almost toasted. The wax has been burning for hours, and its scent clings to the stones like sleep. You close the door gently behind you. The candle is already lit, its tiny flame steady in the airless space. It rests in a deep brass basin, half filled with hardened wax. Someone has left a small scrap of parchment on the table beside it. A note. 9th line by Sext. Replace at Vespers. You check the level. The wax has melted just to the edge of the 8th mark. Just on time. As always. Historians still argue whether monks used wax clocks only for prayer divisions or for more practical tasks, meal prep, library hours, even time spent copying texts. Likely it was all of the above. And perhaps, more than that, it was a comfort. The idea that time could melt away without clamor. Without gears or gongs. Just a slow, golden fade. You sit on the low stool by the wall, listening to the almost imperceptible drip. Every now and then, a drop lands with a sound that feels like punctuation, like a sentence ending, or a thought completing itself. You watch the wax pool slowly at the base, curling into itself like sleeping cats. Someone once tried to carve an elaborate clock face into the baseplate, with numbers and dials. The abbot had it removed. Time is not to be looked at, he said, but passed through. The candle itself is thick, thicker than a loaf of bread and nearly as tall as your knee. Pure beeswax, molded over several days with care and prayer. It burns slowly, evenly, without flicker. The monks who make these do so with reverence, never speaking while they pour the layers. You helped once, years ago. Your candle came out lopsided. You still remember Brother Ignatius' raised eyebrow. You study the baseplate. A few hardened drips have collected awkwardly near the edge, and you scrape them away gently with a spoon, saving the wax to be re-melted. Nothing wasted. The used wax, darkened slightly, carries with it a record of the hours that have already passed, history in resin. A small notch in the wall holds the replacement candle for tonight. You'll swap it once Vespers begins. There's a ritual to it. Extinguish the old flame. Trim the wick. Place the new candle. Offer a brief prayer not for more time, but for calmer time. Then light it again, always in silence. You remember one winter when the wax clock malfunctioned. The wick burned too fast. The marks melted in half the usual span. The entire abbey ate dinner at what turned out to be 3 in the afternoon. No one noticed for hours. Only later did Brother Hugo mutter, "Even wax has moods." You glance around the room. The walls are bare save for an old, soot-blackened icon of St. Ambrose, whose expression seems to change depending on where you stand. Today, he looks almost amused. You pull your sleeves over your hands to warm your fingers. The wax gives off a quiet heat, gentler than fire, more dependable than the sun through stone windows. It keeps the room at a steady warmth, enough that the chill of the cloister doesn't intrude. You check the time again, almost to the 9th mark. You stretch slowly, mindful of your knees, and prepare the next candle. It's heavy in your hands, smooth and faintly sticky. The base has been pre-scored by Brother Aurelian, who insists he can divide time by feel alone. You're not sure if he's right, but his candles always seem to burn true. As you set it down, you catch your own reflection in the brass basin. Your face looks older than you expect. Wax light is generous in some ways and ruthless in others. but your hands are steady, and the seal on your robe's hem still holds. That's enough. The door creaks softly as you step out, leaving the wax to burn in peace. Behind you, the candle glows steadily in the dim, unchanging room, a slow, golden record of passing moments. Drip, pause, drip. Outside, the wind has picked up, and you can hear the distant toll of the bell tower announcing the changing hour. But you don't hurry. Time, in this place, is never lost, only melted. You move next toward the novice quarters. Not to scold or supervise, but to retrieve something simpler, your wax tablet. It's not fancy, not illuminated or gilded, just a plain wooden frame, pocket-sized, filled with cooled beeswax that's been scraped and rewritten more times than you can count. Today, you'll need it to jot down a list of herbal supplies, plus maybe a passing thought or two that wouldn't survive the walk to parchment. The wax tablet is your quiet companion, always there, always erasable. You find it where you left it, tucked under your cot, wrapped in linen. You unwrap it slowly, carefully, like unfolding a secret. The wax inside is dark from use, smoothed over and re-poured dozens of times. Faint lines remain, ghosts of old notes, a psalm fragment, a misspelled recipe, and what appears to be a diagram of a chicken, possibly by a sleep-deprived brother Ninian. You grab your stylus from the shelf, bone-handled, slightly chipped, but well-balanced, and press the tip into the wax with a satisfying click. No ink to spill, no parchment to smudge, just quiet scratches in pliable gold brown. You make a note. Lavender. Thyme. Yarrow. Beeswax to melt. Tuesday. You lean the stylus flat and erase it again, smoothing the surface with practiced strokes. The wax responds like warm memory, easy to reshape, always willing to forget. Historians still argue whether wax tablets were merely utilitarian or if they held sentimental value for monks. Some were found buried with their owners. Others passed between scribes like sacred tools. Yours? Well, it's a little of both. You once confessed a bad dream into this wax and scraped it away before lauds. Today, it serves more practical needs. You jot down a quote from a passing homily. Silence is the wax that holds wisdom's wick. It's not bad. Could be your next margin note. Outside, a novice stumbles past, balancing a tray of pewter spoons. He glances at your tablet and asks, too casually, if he might borrow it to sketch an idea for choir seating. You raise one eyebrow and hold the tablet slightly closer. You still owe me wax from Lent. You whisper. He grins and scurries off. You flip the tablet over. On the back, you've carved a tiny compass rose, not because you're lost, but because you like knowing where your notes point. It's off-center, slightly lopsided, but still yours. Once, in the middle of winter, the wax froze solid. You tried to warm it with your breath, only to fog it so badly you erased the wrong line and spent a week looking for your own handwriting. Now, you carry a small pouch of beeswax shavings with you, just enough to repair or recoat the surface when needed. You make a mental note to refill it. You wander out toward the garden, tablet tucked under one arm, stylus in your sleeve. The ground is soft from last night's rain, and the benches are still damp, but you find one patch of stone dry enough to sit. You balance the tablet on your lap and sketch a rough outline of the herb beds. You're no artist, but you like knowing where the lemon balm is hiding this week. A bee buzzes near your ear, one of the monastery's own. Probably a scout from the western hives. You swat gently, not out of fear, but out of reflex. She dances away, unbothered. You write one more thing in the wax before heading back. The bee is busy, but never in a hurry. Not bad. Maybe that, too, deserves a spot in the margins of a psalter someday. The wind shifts. You wipe the tablet clean again with the flat edge of the stylus. You've erased everything, but something always lingers. A warmth, a curve in the wax, a slight dip where words once were. That's the thing about wax, it remembers differently than parchment. Less formally, more intimately. As you wrap the tablet once more in its cloth and slip it back under your arm, you think, what a strange joy it is to write something knowing it will be gone by sundown. But somehow, still, it matters. Back through the cloister you go, steps echoing softly against the walls. You pass two brothers muttering about lost vellum sheets and nod politely. They don't ask what you're holding. Everyone here knows the shape of a wax tablet, knows its comfort. Its simplicity. It's the kind of tool you don't appreciate until it's missing. You return the stylus to its hook, careful not to let it clatter. The quiet is yours to protect. The wax will wait for its next thought, and so will you. Your path turns toward the library again. But you're not here to read. Not this time. You're here to protect, because while parchment may be the soul of the scriptorium, it's the wax that shields that soul when the world gets damp, leaky, and generally disobedient to preservation. You pull open the tall oak doors and step into the dry hush of the library. The air is heavy with vellum, dust, and the vague smell of something toasted, possibly old glue. Rows of tightly packed scrolls line the walls like resting monks themselves. And somewhere in the corner, a low draft whispers beneath a warped window frame. That's the problem. Again. Today's task. Reinforcing scrolls with a light coat of beeswax. Not to make them waterproof. That would be a fantasy, but just enough to help them resist the soft siege of damp that seems to sneak in every spring. You open the cabinet marked Scrolls, Vulnerable, and select 3 of the usual suspects, a copy of Pliny the Elder, an old commentary on the Song of Songs, and something unlabeled but suspiciously slimy near the edges. You lay them on the work table and reach for your kit, a shallow dish, a warmed cloth, and a beeswax salve mixed with rosemary and a drop of vinegar. The technique is delicate, too much wax, and the parchment stiffens like old bark. Too little, and the moisture will creep in anyway, curling the edges like scorched toast. You dip the cloth lightly, press it to the parchment's edge, and draw it along the seam in one long, slow motion. The wax leaves behind a barely visible sheen, like sunlight clinging to dewdrops. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or merely local. Some believe certain abbeys swore off it entirely, worried that even the scent of beeswax might soften the minds of overzealous readers. But in your monastery, it's tradition, quiet, practical, fragrant tradition. The scrolls themselves vary wildly in temperament. Pliny rolls obediently, as if grateful for the attention. The Song of Songs manuscript curls flirtatiously, and the unlabeled scroll, well, you might be the first to touch it since the Norman conquest. You mutter a short prayer and proceed anyway. You remember Brother Alwyn once tried to waterproof an entire psalter by dipping the corners in hot wax. The result? 4 ruined pages and a lecture from the abbot so dry it nearly caught fire. You, fortunately, have learned moderation. As you work, the scent of warm wax fills the space. It mingles with the library's natural musk and somehow makes everything feel both older and more alive. There's a strange comfort in it, like tucking someone in with a blanket that smells of their childhood. You finish with the last scroll, then set it aside to cool. The wax must harden slowly, evenly. No quick drying here. You glance up at the leaded windows, where a small drop of condensation slides slowly down the glass. You reach for a scrap of waxed cloth and stuff it gently into the window seam. Not pretty, but effective. Brother Reginald will thank you later, probably with a grunt. You move through the rest of the scrolls with practiced rhythm. Unroll. Inspect. Wax. Smooth. Re-roll. Some feel brittle. Others still hold a faint warmth from previous handling. One scroll, oddly, smells faintly of fennel. No explanation. You leave it for last, out of respect for its herbal eccentricity. As you pack up your kit, you notice your hands have that faint golden sheen again. Wax traces, like fingerprints in reverse. You rub them together, feeling the slight tackiness that every monk here learns to ignore. Wax becomes part of you, on your hands, your sleeves, even your thoughts. You replace the scrolls carefully in their cabinet, tying the cords gently and securing the latches with a dab of wax just under the hook. Not for sealing, but for memory, so the next monk will know someone's cared for them. One final scroll remains on the table. You unroll it slowly. It's blank. Well, almost blank. A few faint lines scratched near the top, for the words we have yet to write. You pause. Is it a leftover template? A misplaced practice sheet? Or something meant to be blank, to wait? You give it the same gentle wax treatment as the others. Then re-roll it and place it in the drawer reserved for unfinished thoughts. It seems to belong there. You close the cabinet and blow out the nearby candle. The faint curl of smoke dances upward, disappearing into the high beams. You watch it vanish and feel the satisfaction of work well done, not flashy, not celebrated, but deeply necessary. As you leave the library, you press your palm to the doorframe, a habit now, as if to seal the room behind you. The wax lingers on your fingers like memory, like blessing, like silence that has chosen to stay a little longer. The bell for none rings in the distance, low and unhurried, as you make your way across the cloister walk toward the workshop. This part of the monastery smells like cedar shavings, oiled rope, and metal that's been handled with care. You're here today not for furniture or tools, but for something much finer, thread, or more specifically, beeswaxed thread, one of those tiny, nearly invisible things that holds the whole monastery together. You duck through the heavy door into the dim-lit space where monks mend books, bind parchments, and occasionally stitch their own sleeves closed after catching them on thorns. A pile of plain linen robes sits neatly to one side. A half-bound missal rests on a bench, patiently waiting its turn, and near the window, a small table gleams in afternoon light. On it, several spools of rough linen thread and a bar of pale yellow beeswax, stamped with a cloverleaf from Brother Amius' hive. You pick up the wax block and run your thumb along its surface. It's firm but pliable, warm from the sun that's been sneaking through the window all day. Beside it lies a spool of thread, the end already frayed. You pinch the thread between your fingers and draw it slowly across the wax. Again and again, each pass leaves it smoother, stronger, and more obedient. You're not binding books today, nor robes. Your task is to prepare enough waxed thread for a set of hymnals being restored by Brother Julian, who insists that singing from a book held together by unwaxed thread is asking for disaster. You don't argue. You've seen his temper when a binding fails mid-gloria. Historians still argue whether waxed thread originated purely from utility or evolved into ritual. Some manuscripts show notes in the margins, little prayers written during the waxing process. May this thread hold as truth holds. Or, let no word slip away. Superstition? Maybe. But today, you find yourself murmuring the same words under your breath. With each draw of thread through the wax, you create something stronger, not just physically, but spiritually. The wax seals the fibers together, giving the thread body in memory. It moves like it knows where it's going. You hang each piece neatly over the wooden dowel to cool. Once hardened, they'll curve slightly, like tiny bows, ready to be pulled taut through folded folios. A novice steps into the room with a torn robe and hopeful eyes. You set down your work and thread a needle with the last piece of waxed linen. The robe is nothing fancy, standard brown, with a ripped hem where it likely caught on bramble or nail. You sit on the low bench, robe across your knees, and begin to stitch. The thread glides through the fabric with surprising grace. No snag, no fray. The wax does its job, guiding each pull like it was born to weave. The boy stands quietly, watching you work. Finally, he asks, "Why wax?" You pause. The answer is obvious, and yet not. So the thread remembers where it's going. You say. He nods, not quite understanding, but satisfied. You hand him the robe, and he slips it back on with shy gratitude. He leaves the room like a silent breeze, and you return to your bench. You remember the old binding you repaired last winter, a psalter so beloved that the pages practically fell apart in your hands. It wasn't the leather or the ink that held it together, but the waxed thread beneath the seams, like sinew beneath skin, unseen but essential. You turn next to the bookbinding bench, where folios lie in neat stacks. You thread a wide-eyed needle and begin sewing them together, careful to keep the waxed thread straight and smooth. The stitches are small, almost invisible, but each one locks memory in place. This is a hymn about to be sung, a prayer waiting for a voice. As you finish one booklet, you press it flat and rub the spine lightly with wax, just enough to seal the stitching. You press your palm over it, feeling the quiet warmth spread beneath your skin. The wax isn't loud. It doesn't shine like gold leaf or scent the air like frankincense. But it lasts. It whispers strength into every seam. You line up the completed books in a row, their bindings straight, their covers plain but sturdy. They'll be used at Sunday's procession, held by shaky fingers, lifted during psalms. No one will see the waxed thread, but they'll feel its work every time a page turns without tearing. You clean your tools, wiping the needle and reshaping the wax bar for the next day. It's dented now, curved by use, a little smaller than when you started. You run your thumb over the worn surface. There's something comforting about that. 2. You slide the extra thread into a small wooden drawer, each strand coiled like sleeping snakes. And before you leave, you write a short note on a scrap of wax tablet. Thread complete. Quiet and strong, you pin the note to the workbench with a waxed tack and step out into the cloister once more. Evening is near, the stones are cooling, and somewhere nearby, pages await the quiet strength only beeswax can offer. You're on your way to the dormitory when you hear a faint rustle, an all too familiar sound in a monastery where books and bread are equally at risk. You stop, listen, another scuffle, this time behind the north alcove where the storage shelves lean awkwardly into shadow. You sigh, it's not your job to chase mice. But here you are again, summoned by the soft chaos of whiskers and parchment. You double back through the cloister, through the warming kitchen, and into the long room where backup hymnals, sealed baskets, and storage scrolls are stacked ceiling high in organized disorder. And behind them, tucked between the shelf beams, your secret weapon, beeswax. Not just wax, of course. Wax mixed with dried herbs, lavender, pennyroyal, sage, and a bit of rosemary, pressed into little balls, wrapped in cheesecloth, and tied with linen string. The monks call them quiet bundles. You call them mouse diplomacy. You light a stubby beeswax candle and begin placing the bundles, one on each shelf. One near the bin of flour, and one near Brother Adrian's stash of fig paste that he thinks no one knows about. The scent begins to spread, soft and herbal. You've learned over time which blends do best. Lavender calms the mice, sage confuses them, and rosemary makes them turn tail entirely, or so Brother Emile claims. A mouse hates rosemary like a monk hates loud bells. Historians still argue whether herbal wax sachets had any real effect on vermin or if it was just hopeful folklore. But the fact that 3 abbeys across Europe recorded near-identical recipes? That seems like more than coincidence. You squat beside the lowest shelf, where a suspicious pile of nibbled parchment corners confirms what you already know. Some tiny pilgrim has been reading after hours. You rub a bit of the wax directly onto the shelf edge, leaving a faint sheen that smells strongly of marjoram. The idea is not to poison, not to trap, just to politely ask the mice to take their reading habits elsewhere. Then comes the second part of your mission, gossip control. See, mice aren't the only creatures drawn to unattended corners. In every abbey, in every generation, there are whispers, words that find their way into the walls. Behind books, under cushions, words that grow teeth if left alone. Brother Marius swears the herb wax bundles also stop excessive conversation in the library, though you suspect he's just tired of being interrupted during his 3rd reading of the Rule of St. Benedict. Still, tradition is tradition. You move to the corner shelf near the lectern where novice brothers gather to copy and murmur. There, you hang a wax sachet shaped like a tiny bee, handmade, slightly crooked. Inside, dried lemon balm, violet petals, and a pinch of dried apple skin. The sweet scent fills the air immediately. It's subtle, but effective. Within minutes, even the whisperiest of monks starts blinking slowly and forgetting what he meant to say. Conversation trails off. The wax does its work. You remember one winter when the novices made a game of hiding wax bundles in each other's robes. For a week, the cloister smelled like a traveling market, spicy, floral, overwhelmingly beeswaxed. The abbot banned it, of course, but your room still smells faintly of cinnamon to this day. Back in the supply room, you finish your route by placing one final wax bundle near the door, this one heavy on mint and sage. For deterrence, you stick a little parchment label beneath it, peace within and without. Whether it applies to mice or murmurs, you'll let the wax decide. You snuff out the candle and let the scent linger in the dark. The room feels different now, less like storage, more like sanctuary. You sweep your hand along the edge of the nearest shelf. Smooth, clean, whisper-free. You head back through the cloister, passing a young brother who looks suspiciously like he's holding a fig. You nod, he nods, Nothing is said. Back in your cell, you open a drawer filled with leftover wax fragments, shavings, candle nubs, bits from old ceilings. You crush a few dried rose petals between your fingers, mix them into the wax, and press the blend into a new cloth pouch. You label it with a smile, for Brother Adrian's fig paste. Tomorrow, you'll hang it on his shelf. Not as a warning, as a blessing. You lie back on your cot, the smell of lavender and beeswax still clinging to your sleeves. Somewhere, a mouse changes direction. The next morning begins before dawn, as so many do, with the low rumble of the chapel bell and the rustling of robes half awake. But today, your duties pull you toward a different kind of illumination, not prayer, not ceremony, but the careful, contemplative art of map making. Yes, monks make maps, not many, and rarely of places they've seen, but of paths imagined, copied, or gathered from travelers' tales and long-dead pilgrims. You step into the cartography room, a narrow chamber tucked between the library and the scriptorium, where the air is always cool and smells faintly of ash, old ink, and beeswax, especially beeswax. On the center table lies the vellum, stretched, pinned, blank except for one soft curve already drawn in pencil, the slow bend of a river known to no one in the building. You light the beeswax candle above the table, a thick stub nestled in a deep iron dish. Its flame is steady, warm, and just bright enough to see fine lines without casting hard shadows. This is why mapmakers prefer beeswax. Tallow sputters, oil flickers, but beeswax burns like a whisper. You gather your tools, a compass made from a twisted nail and bit of twine, a quill trimmed for precision, a block of ink. But first, you coat your fingertips in the faintest film of wax, not melted, just soft. This will keep your skin from pulling on the vellum, will keep your breath from smudging corners. It's an old trick, and a good one. You begin with the coastlines. Not because they're accurate, honestly. No one's seen these shores in a generation, but because they frame the world. As you trace each curve, the candlelight reflects in tiny gleams across the waxed edge of your guide rule. You steady your hand, breathe slowly, and draw. Historians still argue whether these monastery maps were meant to guide travel or illustrate theology. Some depict actual terrain, others place Jerusalem squarely in the center, with dragons curling around the corners. One even has a small illustration of a two-headed ox beside the Danube. You copied that ox last winter, and you still get compliments. Today's map is more humble, just the river, a few roads, some border towns marked by dots and hopeful Latin names. But it matters, because Brother Cyril is preparing a treatise on pilgrimage routes, and the abbot wants a copy to present next month. You draw carefully, dipping your quill, blowing gently, correcting here and there with the edge of your stylus. Every so often, the wax candle gutter just slightly, a curl of smoke, a flicker of heat, and then, steady again. You pause to trim the wick, always with care. If the light wavers too much, your lines do too, and there's no erasing ink from vellum. Well, not without a small prayer and a very sharp knife. You remember a mistake you made once. Early on, you mislabeled a mountain pass, and 2 pages later, the abbot's donkey ended up in a peat bog. He returned late, damp, and unusually silent. Since then, you check your compass marks twice, and your wax candle 3 times. The beeswax here plays a quiet, vital role. It coats the string used to bind the guide tools. It seals the ink pots when not in use. It even lines the drawer where you keep the colored powders, lapis, ochre, and malachite, protecting them from moisture. Without wax, the entire map-making process would unravel. Drip by drip, by midday, your hands ache. The river is finished. Its bends elegant and entirely fictional. The road to Tours curls neatly southward. You add a decorative wind rose in the top corner, outlined in pale red, and shade it softly with beeswax-laced chalk. It glows faintly under the candlelight. You take a break to warm your fingers near the wax flame. Not too close. Once, Brother Cedric leaned in too far and singed his eyebrow. He still claims it gave him a monastic asymmetry. You don't argue. When you return to the map, you feel calmer, more precise. The wax candle burns lower now, but its light is truer than ever. You ink the final border. Mark the abbey in its tiny square near the edge, and sign your initials in the margin. Not a signature, just a whisper of presence. FP for Frater Petrus. Or, fingers perpetually waxed. Depending on who you ask. You blow out the candle and sit back. The map is done. You set it in the drying frame, where it will rest for several hours before being rolled and sealed. You clean your tools, recoat your stylus with wax, and fold the spare parchment into neat squares. Before leaving, you snuff the wick with your fingers, just a quick pinch. And the flame vanishes. The scent it leaves behind is unlike any other. Sweet, clean, faintly of almonds. It stays in your robe, in your hair, in your sleep, and somewhere on the map you just made. A river bends around a mountain that may not exist, glowing faintly in the light of a candle no one will see. You leave the map room behind, your sleeves still carrying the faint trace of beeswax and ink, and follow the winding corridor toward the infirmary. The air cools as you go, stone thickening around you, light dimming, voices disappearing until only the sound of your own breath echoes between the arches. The infirmary is quiet now, not abandoned, never that, but hushed in the way places become when pain has passed. Is simply sleeping. Brother Matthew greets you with a silent nod as you enter. He's tending to a novitiate who strained his back lifting hymnals. You step lightly to the far end of the room where the old cabinet stands, its hinges rubbed with wax to keep from squeaking. Inside, a bundle of folded linens, each faintly stiff, faintly sweet, waxed cloths, and one soft linen shroud, folded like a memory. Today, you're here to prepare for the inevitable, not out of morbid foresight, but quiet duty. One of the elder brothers, Brother Pascal, has taken to bed. His breath comes slower now, each one shallower than the last. There is no fear, only stillness. You take the shroud in your hands and lay it across the table. It's been treated already with wax, a thin infusion worked into the weave using gentle heat and a padded iron. The result is a cloth that resists damp, that drapes without clinging, that holds not the body, but the dignity of it. You run your hand across the fabric. It's soft, not stiff. The beeswax gives it weight without burden. This shroud won't stick, won't tear, won't betray the final silence it's meant to carry. You remember the first time you helped wrap a brother. It was late spring, and the wildflowers were blooming beyond the wall. Brother Lucian had died in his sleep. One hand curled as if holding a page. You folded the shroud beneath his shoulders, smoothing the waxed linen over his chest. And for a moment, it felt like tucking someone in before sleep. Historians still argue whether waxed shrouds were standard or exceptional. Many abbeys preferred untreated cloth. Easier to procure, quicker to sew. But here, in your monastery, wax has always accompanied endings. Not for preservation, not for display, but for respect. You begin to prepare the smaller cloths, waxed wrappings for hands. For feet, each one is marked faintly with a cross pressed into the wax while still warm. They're subtle, almost invisible, but you know where to look. Beside you, Brother Matthew opens the tiny vial of myrrh. You melt a beeswax bead in your palm and mix in a drop, rubbing the blend between your fingers until it softens, warms. You kneel beside the small bowl of water and dip a linen square into it. Then wipe down the wooden anointing spoon. It smells of centuries. Later, this spoon will be used to anoint Brother Pascal's forehead, chest, hands. The oil will be mixed with the wax balm, a practice unique to your order. You've heard that in other places, they anoint only with oil, but here, the beeswax holds the moment. It keeps the fragrance longer. It slows the touch. You lay out the waxed linens beside the small preparation altar, folded, aligned, ready. There's a candle near the corner, pure beeswax. Tall, narrow, unadorned. It's lit only once, and only at the hour of final breath. It's called Lux Finita, the last light. You check the wick, trim it gently, and set the candle upright. Not today, perhaps, but soon. You remember when Brother Gerard passed. It was winter. The wax in the shroud cracked from the cold. You and Brother Benoit spent hours mending it with warm stones, holding them wrapped in cloth to soften the fibers. It worked, barely. The body was still, the cloth still golden. You move now to the far corner, where the body will rest after the rites. You smooth the padded bench and lay a linen sheet atop it, followed by a waxed cloth. No one will see this part, but it matters. The wax prevents seepage. It contains the sacred stillness. It carries no scent, only memory. As you finish your task, you feel a peace settle over the room, not a joy, not sadness, but a soft acceptance. The waxed linens do not shout of death. They whisper of care, of dignity in final moments. You blow gently on your fingers to cool the wax bomb and rub the remainder into your wrist. It smells faintly of cedar and myrrh. You gather the folded linens, place them back in the cabinet, and close the door with care. Before you leave, you stop by Brother Pascal's bedside. He sleeps, breathing shallowly, his hand resting on the blanket. You tuck the edge in a little more snugly and press a silent prayer into the air between you. Outside, the wind stirs again. The trees murmur, and somewhere deep in the waxed folds of cloth, time pauses, not for long, just long enough to say goodbye with gentleness. The path to the hives winds past the vegetable gardens, through a gate carved with vine motifs, and down into the orchard. The trees are mostly bare now, save for the stubborn pears clinging to high branches, and the air carries a hush like someone's drawn a blanket over the land. You walk slowly, basket in hand, ready to visit the most delicate residents of the monastery, the bees. It's easy to forget, amid the chants and wax seals and parchment piles, that every candle and balm, every polish and thread begins here, with wings, flowers, and a humming devotion older than scripture. The hives sit in a sunken grove, spaced evenly and marked with wooden signs, Agnus, Pax, Cloridas. You greet them like friends. Today isn't for harvesting. That's already been done for the season. No, today is for tending, for listening, for checking the state of the wax and making sure the bees have what they need to survive the winter. You lift the lid on the first hive gently, slowly. The bees are quiet now, clustered deep inside, their work paused but never truly still. You don't disturb them much, just enough to see that the wax comb is holding, pale gold, delicately ribbed, like lace spun from sunlight. You run your fingertip along the edge of the frame, warm, faintly sticky, alive. There's an old saying passed down through generations of monks: the wax remembers the bee. And here, among the hum and sweetness, you feel it to be true. Historians still argue whether medieval monks considered beekeeping a spiritual act or simply a necessity. Some orders kept elaborate bee logs, tracking nectar flows and queen rotations. Others simply thanked God when the candles burned clean. Your monastery? A little of both. You pray over the hives, but you also inspect them for mites. You check the second hive, its combs darker, more mature. These will be melted down in spring to create fresh blocks of wax for polish and seal. You scrape a small bit into your collection jar, just enough for use in candle testing. It's sweet smelling, with the faintest note of thyme. The bees have been visiting Brother Aloysius' herb garden again. You pause to examine a broken frame from hive Cloridas. The comb has crumbled at the edge, likely from damp or overhandling. You set it on the workbench beside the grove and trim the damaged wax carefully. Each cut releases a new note, floral, resinous, deep. You'll melt these scraps later in the small iron pot kept behind the chapel. That pot is older than most of the brothers. Legend says it was first used to pour a candle for Saint Boniface himself. Probably untrue, but the pot still works, and the wax still runs smooth. You tend to the hives slowly, mindful not to rush. Bees hate urgency. They prefer predictability, order, a steady rhythm, like psalm recitation. You hum softly as you work, not a chant, just a low drone to keep yourself company. A few bees emerge, testing the air. One lands on your sleeve, then moves on without fuss. Once, during a particularly cold spring, you brought warm cloths out to the hives, wrapping them like infants. Brother Maurice called it sentimental. The bees called it survival. You check the wax cappings, those delicate plugs the bees use to seal honey into the comb. They're smooth today, unbroken, a good sign. You note it on your wax tablet, Cloridas, sealed, 3 frames. You remember a story Brother Hugo told, about a monastery in Italy that claimed its beeswax was so pure. Their candles never flickered in wind. Likely an exaggeration, But the idea lingers. As the sun begins to dip, you gather your tools, the scraper, the brush, the tiny jar of trimmed wax. You close each hive with care, offering a small blessing as you do. To the workers, rest. To the queen, wisdom. To the wax, memory. You linger at hive packs, the quietest of the three. It has always been your favorite. The bees here are gentler, slower, more deliberate in their flight. Last year, you found a tiny knot of wax shaped like a heart buried in one of the combs. No one believed you, of course, but you still carry it, wrapped in cloth, tucked into your drawer beside the ink knife. You blow gently over the top of the hive, sending a faint breath of warmth into the cold wood. Then you turn and begin the walk back, the basket heavier now with scraps and scent and meaning. You pass the herb beds again. Lavender still hangs in bunches, drying for winter sachets. You pluck a sprig and press it into your sleeve. Later, when you melt the wax down, you'll add it to the batch, not because it's required, because it feels right. As the abbey comes back into view, lit golden by the dipping sun, you realize how much of your day has moved in waxen circles, melting, mending, making, and yet none of it feels repetitive. It feels like prayer in motion, a way to speak without speaking. You enter the workshop, set down your tools, and reach for the melting pot. The beeswax scrap drops in with a soft sound. Half sizzle, half sigh. The room begins to smell like sunlight again. The feast day approaches. You can feel it in the air, not just from the extra clatter in the kitchens or the sudden uptick in monks pretending they've always known how to embroider, but from the faint aroma of melting wax. It wafts through the corridors like an old friend returning after a long journey. Warm, honeyed, and just a little smoky. Today, your hands are called not for writing, nor wrapping, nor stitching, but for shaping. The monastery prepares small wax icons and figurines for the procession and offerings. A tradition older than many of the walls that surround you. You step into the molding room, a narrow space between the cloister garden and the bell tower stairs. A few wooden tables line the walls, covered with cloths and half-finished shapes. The molds themselves rest on a wide shelf, some carved from walnut, others cast in clay. Saints, beasts, angels, animals that may or may not exist. You select a few. Saint Cuthbert, a lamb with uneven legs, a mold that claims to be a griffin but looks suspiciously like a chicken. On the stove, a deep pot of beeswax simmers slowly, stirred occasionally by Brother Isidore, who mutters lovingly to the mixture like it's a misbehaving soup. Not too hot, he says without looking up. If it bubbles, it forgets its shape. You nod, already rolling up your sleeves. You dip the first ladle of wax and slowly pour it into the St. Cuthbert mold. The wax flows thickly, silently, settling into every groove of the carving, his hands, his staff, the little bird on his shoulder. You tap the mold gently to release bubbles, then set it aside to cool. Historians still argue whether these wax figurines were meant as devotional tools or merely symbolic gifts. Some even think they were traded among monasteries like tokens of mutual respect. Others suggest they were medieval souvenirs. Either way, they hold something more than shape. They hold presence. Your next pour goes into the lamb mold. This one's trickier. The legs are thin and tend to break if the wax is too soft or too cold. You steady your hands and let the wax glide. This one, you hope, will survive the unmolding intact. While the molds rest, you begin warming the smaller wax pieces. Little medallions to be stamped with symbols, fish, loaves, doves, the occasional snail. Brother Gregory insists snails are a biblical metaphor. No one argues anymore. You press the hot brass stamp into the softened wax, holding it just long enough to imprint, then gently peel it away. Each medallion is stacked carefully onto linen trays, soon to be passed out during the feast. Not for eating, of course, though once a novice did try. He regretted it immediately. You return to the cooled molds. Carefully, you loosen the wax from its shape. Saint Cuthbert emerges beautifully, his features smooth, his little bird remarkably lifelike. You place him upright on the table, where he stares at you solemnly. The lamb, however, loses a leg in the process. You sigh. It happens. You remelt it without ceremony. Every saint has their failures. You glance across the room where Brother Adrian is working on a wax bust, an experimental project. Entirely unauthorized. It appears to be a self-portrait. Exaggerated nose and all. He catches your eye, shrugs, and mimes silence. You nod. Feast day, after all, allows for a little levity. You finish unmolding the rest. A phoenix, a monk with exaggerated ears, a basilisk that looks like a mildly annoyed duck. You arrange them all on the side table beneath the window where the afternoon sun warms the wax just enough to make them gleam. As you clean the molds, you remember a story passed down from Brother Alon, who claimed he once made a wax copy of a relic so perfect. Pilgrims came to venerate the wrong one. No one ever proved it, but every mold you handle feels like it could carry a little magic. If only for an hour. You prepare a final batch, smaller figurines to be hidden inside the loaves of sweet bread baked for the celebration. Whoever finds one is said to receive a year of unexpected insight. Or indigestion. The monks are divided. You pour the wax slowly, murmuring a quiet chant beneath your breath. Not for accuracy, for intention. The wax hears you. Maybe. It settles without bubbles. You smile. You set the last molds to cool and begin tidying the workspace. Stray drips are scraped and saved. The unused wax is poured into a long brick mold to be remelted another day. Even the crumbs swept from the table are tucked into a cloth pouch. Nothing is wasted. You glance once more at the table of completed figures. Some will go to the altar. Others will be tucked into satchels. A few might end up in garden corners, guarding the lavender. One or two might just be found weeks from now in a novice's sock drawer. As the bell for Compline begins to toll, you place St. Cuthbert and the legless lamb side by side on the windowsill. Not every offering needs perfection. Some just need presence. The wax cools. The light fades. And somewhere in the monastery, the feast begins to hum. Not with sound, but with warm anticipation, shaped by quiet hands. Sealed in golden form. The night is deepening now. Compline has ended. The chapel is dark, save for a single beeswax candle flickering on the altar. Its gentle light dancing across worn stone and the faint shimmer of gold thread in the vestments, folded neatly in their chests. The silence is thick, not empty, but full of prayers still hovering in the rafters, of footsteps softened by centuries, of wax cooling into stillness. You make your way slowly through the cloister, past closed doors and sleeping thoughts, until you reach the tiny side chapel where the vigil candle is kept. It burns low, surrounded by small offerings, herb bundles, prayer slips, the occasional wax figurine placed with hopeful reverence. Tonight, it's your turn to tend the flame. You kneel beside the old brass holder, watching the way the wax pools at the base, translucent and golden, like morning sunlight trapped in a bowl. The wick trembles slightly, as if dreaming. You trim it carefully with your candle shears, letting the used bit fall into the tray with a soft click. Beside you is a small pot of wax, pure, filtered, poured last week from the hive scraps you collected yourself. You warm it between your hands, just enough to make it pliable, and press a fresh bead around the base of the candle to steady it. Not necessary, but it feels right. This candle isn't meant to be replaced often. It's not measured like the time candles, not molded like the feast day icons. This one is meant to last, to hold a place, a promise. You sit in silence, listening to the soft crackle of flame, the distant creak of wood, and somewhere far away, the breath of someone dreaming. You reach for the small cloth pouch tucked inside your robe, a collection of wax beads pressed between lavender sprigs and cedar bark. You place it beneath the candle holder, unseen, just a little extra comfort for the space. Then you lean back against the cold stone, close your eyes for a moment, and let the scent of beeswax carry you elsewhere. There's a story some monks whisper in the winter months, when sleep is slow to come and the wind sings through the cloister arches. They say that if you melt wax while praying, and if your thoughts are pure and slow, the smoke will carry your petitions upward. Not fast, not in a rush, but faithfully, quietly. You've never asked whether it's true. You've never needed to. Tonight, you melt a single bead of wax in your palm. Just one. You whisper nothing. You just hold the warmth until it cools. Then place it on the stone sill beside you. No one will find it. but maybe someone will feel it. A small seal on the night. You stay there for a long time, watching the candle burn. You think of all the ways beeswax has passed through your day, through fingers, thread, memory, silence. It hasn't spoken once, but it's said everything. And now, as the final shadows stretch and the world draws into itself like a sleeping cat, you rise slowly, stretch your back, and leave the chapel. You walk past the empty scriptorium, past the herb room, the sealed cabinets, the waxed scrolls and remembered prayers. Every space holds a trace. Every trace, a purpose. You reach your cell and enter quietly. The door closes behind you like the end of a verse. Inside, a beeswax candle waits on your table. You light it not for reading, not for writing, just to let it burn, to soften the edges of the night. You sit on the edge of your bed, remove your shoes, and let the warmth gather around you. You exhale. The wax melts, the wick sighs, and somewhere in that slow, golden light, you begin to drift. And now, with the candle low and the monastery asleep, we begin to let go of the last folds of thought. The walls hold silence like breath. The air is still, heavy with lavender, aged stone, and that faint, sweet trace of beeswax, the kind that lingers on your sleeves long after the work is done. The scent wraps around you, not strong, not insistent, just enough to remind you that the day has been long, gentle, and full of small, sacred things. Your hands, once busy with thread and flame, now rest quietly at your sides. The light in the room pulses like a heartbeat, slow, steady, patient. You hear no bells, you feel no weight, just the comfort of old stone, warm wax, and the soft hum of everything holding. Imagine, now, that you're still seated by that chapel flame, the one you trimmed, tended, trusted. Its light glows behind your eyes even now, guiding you not forward, but inward, into deeper stillness. The wax is pooling, the wick is low, and all around you is peace. There is nothing else to do, nothing to hold. Let the warmth stretch farther across the floor. Let your breath fall gently with the rhythm of the dark. Let even the flame forget itself. The wax has